this computer. Okay.
Hi, I'm Amy from Authors Buzz, and I'm here with Tabitha, award-winning author. We're going to extend our character building. Oh boy. You know what? We're just going to keep that because Tabitha and I today are having one of those days. So sometimes you're going to be having one of those days when you're writing. So real life, and just keep. And I feel like that we're proving our point, Tabitha. Right? Like keep on going. Like
This is real.
keep
This
on
is
keep.
us.
Yeah, this is real. This is real. Okay. So
Okay.
what's the name of our discussion today? It has a cool, funky name, and I love it.
Okay, so a while back, I was working with a friend to try to create panels for Comic Cons, where we do a lot of panels and presentations. And we actually were in a different time zone and didn't realize it. So we had gotten down to breakfast, but it was way earlier than, than we thought it was. And so we sat in the Starbucks and we was like, this is a great time to create new panels. And we came up with one titled A Hero, an Anti-Hero, and a Villain Walk into a Bar. And we just wanted to create something that would be sort of fun and funny, but also sort of highlight the differences in the types of characters that are going to star in your story, whether they're, the main cast or the supporting cast. And so it just prompted a like a panel discussion on character types. And so as a follow-on to what we were talking about last time, and I don't even know when last time was at this point because it's been a little while, where we were talking about couple weeks, character development and where you meet your character and how they change throughout the story. But it's kind of fun to talk about like these interesting prototypes, so to speak, and then how you can work within that main definition of a character type to craft your particular character. And heroes are, obviously the heroes are identifiable as the good guys in the story or the good gals in the story, and but anti-heroes are one I like to talk about because they're a little more fun in my opinion. And so we spend a lot of time at our panels talking about anti-heroes because they feature in a lot of modern storytelling, both on television and movies and in books. And I think some of my favorite antiheroes from a long time ago, Han Solo is an excellent antihero, right? We know he does the right thing. We know he's a good guy. He comes through in the end, but he's a smuggler, he works outside the law. He's, all those things. Dexter, I consider an antihero. He's an anti-hero. He's definitely works outside the law. He's a killer. He's a serial killer, right?
Yeah, that's an understatement.
but why do we hesitate to call him the villain of the story? And it's because he has a moral code, and his moral code doesn't violate our sensibility about things enough to push him into villain category. And he would if he ever killed an innocent person, that would push him into villain status, but he really doesn't, and he evolves. So he's a fun one.
I'm watching The Protector right now, so he falls into that category for sure.
Yeah, there's and I think that's a really fun character to play with because you can really make them gritty and interesting and just sort of believable. I think they're just a little more fun.
Does the story need to have one of those, or you're just it's just a concept to play around with?
I think it's just a concept to play around with. You can have a more clear-cut protagonist, if you think about the traditional hero's journey, right? Where, the either a reluctant hero or a young, youthful, innocent hero, they're not the hero yet. They get called upon to do something. They go on their quest. They have lots of things happen to them in between, and they return, a changed person. And having taken up the mantle of whatever they have to do, often, and you have different prototypes or stereotypes underneath heroes, your reluctant hero, I'm not going to go, I'm not doing it, or the one that dives in and is so enthusiastic and then kind of has to get slapped down a little bit along the way and gets a little more jaded. But the anti-hero is different from the hero, I think, in the sense that they often work outside of the norms or outside of
But they're both protagonists.
Or
do you have one or the other? You either have a hero or anti-hero, or can you have kind of two?
Let's take my favorite Star Wars. We would say Luke was the hero, but Han Solo was too, and so was Leia, right? So you had a whole cast of heroic, and Han Solo just happened to be more colorful, I think, as and interesting. right? Luke was a little
Right.
whiny. We can all agree, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Oh,
Absolutely, 100%. And what I just watched recently, as whiny as ever, I'm like, at least they kept it consistent.
yeah, right.
Whiny Luke,
Whiny
and
Luke.
Leia was a badass.
Yep.
So
Yep. So, and then there's the villain. And when we talk about villains in a story, I think that what makes an interesting villain, I think, is to give them some depth and life and and a backstory. However, it doesn't always have to be that way. You can just have a big bad like Sauron, right? In the Lord of the Rings. We never really know how, I don't think actually we ever know why he is the way he is, the big bad entity, right? Of a big bad sorcerer. But he just
they're
represents.
they're 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 working through that in the I don't know if you've watched the newest series that they have. They are actually doing his backstory.
Which is interesting. They didn't do it for the Emperor in for original trilogy of Star Wars, and it didn't matter. Like he represented something,
Yeah,
represented,
yeah, yeah.
the Emperor, the evil empire, and I think that that's okay. That's acceptable if it works for your story. But if the villain is going to feature as a real character, not a symbolic entity or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
then giving them a backstory. The villain thinks they're the hero of their own story, right? Usually, so they don't think they're the bad
Absolutely,
guy.
yes.
So when you
Mm-hmm.
really bring that to life, I think you can have more moral quandary. You can have more depth of storytelling. You can have more friction. You can have dilemmas, that can be really interesting when you create a villain that actually has, life and depth and that sort of thing. So,
So
those are just some
what
fun
if
things to think
you're
about.
I'm just going to interrupt for a second because we
Yeah,
are
please.
talking about science fiction and fantasy,
Sure.
and there's definitely huge themes of good and evil and the villain. But suppose right now we're talking to somebody who's writing literary fiction, and maybe there isn't. Suppose you don't. What could suppose you don't have like a person villain? Like what takes that space?
Sure. Well, think about the movie The Perfect Storm, right? Where those guys go out and they all die. We know that from the beginning that no one is going to make it out of that alive. And it's kind of like the storm is it's not really a villain because it's but it is it's the thing that they have to try to overcome. And it's just nature. It's Mother Nature. There's no malintent. There's no anything, but it surely creates dramatic tension and suspense. So you can when you're trying to build suspense or you're building a conflict of some sort, it doesn't need to be interpersonal necessarily. The overarching thing, I think about that one a lot because I'm like, that was a really intense story. We all knew the ending, and yet we could still be on our, rooting for them and being on our edge of our seats, and it still allowed for heroic behavior within the context of what was happening there. But there was no real villain, it was Mother Nature doing what Mother Nature does sometimes, brewing up a storm, and it was the perfect storm.
Right.
So,
And that's where the complexity is right in there because
right,
there isn't ill intent. So that's
right.
where that's sort of like the interesting backstory
Right.
that
Somebody didn't sink the ship. Nobody planted a bomb on it or,
yeah.
blew the engines out on purpose. No one was trying to sabotage anything. It was just they got caught in a really big storm that took them down. And so, yeah, I mean, when it depends on the story that you're writing, what you need to bring your conflict to life and to bring your dramatic tension, to tell it as dramatically as possible. So,
But then also, so what I found, I can't speak. We have that disclaimer at the beginning.
yes, yes.
What I have found is a lot of times the first pass through your villain might not be, or your villain subject matter is not really all that interesting. You have to go back in and not make it so black and white, so to speak. So
Sure.
that's something that sometimes comes through in edit.
Yes, for sure. I mean, I know I had to layer that in my first sci-fi trilogy. Like I actually didn't even know some of the answers to the questions that I knew I would need to know by the third book. So for some of it, I left a little open-ended until I came back through, and I had started to develop book 2 and 3 in my mind, and I could come back and layer in a little bit more of that or plant the seeds for that so that I could develop it in later books. you know, especially with regard to what the conflict was really about. And by the end, I was like, you know what? I'm not blowing up the Death Star in this one. It's not going to be that clear cut, because you know what? I think the world isn't that clear cut. You know,
Oh, no, it is not.
you know, there's shades of gray in most of the world conflicts that we have now, with very few exceptions. The people who are we on our side consider the aggressors, or consider the whatever, they on their side look at us that way, or vice versa. And you know, you want morality, I think, to come through without pounding people on the head with your politics, in my opinion, so you can create these good stories and these quandaries through your storytelling. But I definitely felt like by the third book in my trilogy, it needed to be more layered and more complex, because the world today is complex and our sensibilities are not, you know, it's kind of fun to be like, oh, we blew up the Death Star, yay, but I don't know, sometimes it's just
All right, so
satisfying.
you know what? We are going to go. I just have a great idea, because so everyone who's listening or watching this, here's the thing: we are not on our game today.
No. Okay, disclaimer, I am super hungover. I'm in New Orleans, and I am like, I don't even know my name today, really, let's be honest. So,
Yeah.
you know, we're jibber jabbering, but it's fun, right? A little bit of humor and a little bit of
and the same thing is true with your writing. So there is a analogy here that some days you're going to sit on your computer and sit at your computer and you're going to type, but you're keeping that consistency. And what that does is that tells your brain, I am a writer, I'm writing a story. And maybe you look the next day, you're like, oh, that was so bad, I'm just going to delete it. But it was still worthy. It's like going to the gym when you feel like crap.
Right.
So
it's the practice. It's the discipline of
practice.
It's a good practice. And I also will say too, when you're in the middle of, and this is completely off the character topic, but when you're in the middle of drafting and creating, I think it's really important to touch your story every day. Even if you don't have writing time planned, even if you're not, you know, like if it's a day off and you're really consciously taking a day off, to just either read one piece of it or review your notes, just to be in the world, not lose your place in the world while you're in the midst of drafting.
And what I would say is helpful for that is have some kind of draft on your phone someplace so that you can review, and maybe you're just doing notes, you're not actually editing. But I have my novel on my Google Docs, and sometimes when I'm just sitting at a bar having a cocktail, I'll kind of read through, and I'm not going to make strong edits, but I can have an idea of what I might need to go back at. And it is kind of touching that story and keeping it fresh in your mind. And I think that's a good place to end, because I have a great idea for the next topic.
Okay, awesome. We'll look forward to it.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.